Okay, we're going to get started. We're in Mark chapter 9 tonight, right after the Transfiguration. Um, so, starting in verse 14. You need a pen? I got one right here. Good hands. I'm just kidding. Mark 9, we're going to go through the end of the chapter. So, we'll read it all at once, and then we're going to kind of break it up into two sections, and you can see that on the sheet. Sorry, I forgot to hit double-sided when I printed, so you got two sheets tonight. But I did that because I know Brock likes to take notes, and he's got plenty of space to do that. Sorry. So, Mark 9:14. When they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and the scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." He answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me." They brought the boy to him, and when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy. He fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible for the one who believes." Immediately, the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." They went on from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know, for uh, he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand the saying; they were afraid to ask him. They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the way?" But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12, and he said to them, "If anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all." He took a child, and he put him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me." John said to him, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." But Jesus said, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a mighty work in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. For the one who is not against us is for us. For truly I say to you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ will by no means lose his reward. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. And if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than with two hands to go to hell, the unquenchable fire. If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than with 2 feet to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into hell, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves. Be at peace with one another. So we're going to split it into into 2 sections. And so section 1 seems to be a section that this first half, verses 14 through 29, a section that's, I just said it's focused on faith and prayer and spiritual power. So in this section, it highlights to us, right, that the disciples, what happened. If we're setting the scene, like, who was on the mountain for the transfiguration? Well, who was with Jesus? Peter, James, and John. So the 4 of them are coming down. It says, it starts out in verse 14. They're coming down. They see a crowd around the other disciples. And so they go over, and what happens? Why was the crowd there? What was going on? What were they arguing about? You remember? There was a man who brought his son because he was demon possessed, right? And really, I think what's kind of attracted all this attention is, and we know they're bothered by it because they ask him about it later, but the disciples tried to drive out the demon, right? And did they? No, they weren't successful. Disciples failed to heal this demon possessed boy, and so I as we kind of start in on this and reflect on it, I just what I put that question there for you to kind of think through, like, as they come down the mountain, they find the other disciples arguing. They're unable to help this desperate father. He's pretty desperate, right? Like, what's happening to this boy is pretty serious, because it says that he's causing the boy to seize. He's going down. He'll foam at the mouth. He'll grind his teeth. But it also says he'll throw himself into fire. He'll throw himself into water. So he's tried to burn himself. He's tried to drown himself. Like, it's not good. He doesn't know what to do with him. So he's brought him, and the disciples couldn't do anything. What emotions do you think the father, the crowd, what kind of emotions would the disciples be feeling? Like, let's distinguish those things. So what do you think the disciples are feeling? Yeah, they're probably a little bit embarrassed. They're probably confused, because and that's obvious by their question, right? Like, they don't know why they couldn't do it. They can't figure out why they didn't do it, and so they're confused. They're probably embarrassed. They're probably a little bit upset. And what do you think is going on with this father? Yeah, he feels helpless. Yep. Yeah. Disappointed. Um, leaning into that helpless feeling there, there's almost like attached to it in those situations, like it almost leads us to feel hopeless, doesn't it? It's just like, man, no, I don't know that there's any hope here. Especially when these at this point, from what we've seen in Mark's gospel, like we've seen a fair amount of healing. And so the father is there with his son because this is going to be it. And so I don't know if you've ever been in that situation, whether it was physical illness, whether it was, maybe something spiritual, maybe something emotional, just stress or whatever it is. And you thought, or you were almost sure you knew the solution, and then it wasn't the solution. And yeah, that's kind of where this dad is. Like, this was it, and it didn't work. And then you've got this crowd, and what do you think's going on with the crowd? Crowds just amplify things, don't they? Like, um, I mean, anytime, especially when you think about it from the disciples' perspective, like anytime you've done something and it didn't work, or you feel like you failed, and there's a crowd watching, it just makes it that much worse. It just feels like that much bigger of a failure. It's just like, and so I don't know what this looked like. Like, do we have any up to this point? If you reflect back on our study of Mark, like, do we have any evidence that the disciples would be able to do this? Have the disciples done this kind of thing? Right. He sends them out two by two to do that, to do this very thing. So we do, actually. We do. There is like, it's not an unheard of thought that they would maybe be able to drive out this demon. They've done that sort of thing. So it's chaos. The crowd is kind of adding to the chaos. I mean, it doesn't talk about it a whole lot, but I mean, who do we know's kind of always been present in these crowds? Scribes, Pharisees. Um, the key insight I put there is imperfect faith. And I think the reason that's kind of a key insight is I think it's summarized by that father's plea. If he says, I believe, help my unbelief. And you look at that context of him saying that, so it's in verse 24. I believe, help my unbelief. You look right before it, and I want you to see something there. What do you think's going on in verse 23? What's going on when Jesus says, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes? Right. Yep. Tone's kind of important there, and really where we kind of pick up our tone for the if you can is it's in quotes. So he's quoting back to him, like, if you can. What do you mean if you can? But we already highlighted like what's leading up to this, right? Like, this is kind of, it feels helpless, it feels hopeless. It's kind of at that point, and so Jesus, he says what he says, and the man just kind of owns it, right? I believe, but help my unbelief. So he just kind of acknowledges, right, that I probably have doubts. Like, there probably is a part of me that doubts you in this moment, that doubts what you're going to do. And I'm just wondering, I put it there as a question, but man, is that a struggle we can relate to in our own lives? Like, has your relationship with Jesus, or has your prayer life ever looked that way, where it's just like, man, God, I've tried all the stuff, and we've gone to the doctors, and we've tried the medications, or I've tried the solutions, and I've turned in applications, and I still haven't found the right job, or whatever the scenario might be. And we get to this point where here's how I think we this is how I think we disguise our unbelief in prayer with him. We disguise it by, I think, saying what we think he wants to hear. We disguise it by going, well, if it's your will, and I think when we say that sometimes, I'm not saying always, I'm not even saying that's a bad thing for us to acknowledge to him, but I do think sometimes we go to him and it's just like, God, there's part of me that just doubts you in this scenario. Like, I just don't. And I think there's two things at play there. Like, sometimes for us, it's the doubt isn't that he can. Sometimes for us, the doubt is, God, I don't know if you want to. I don't know if you want to do this right now. I don't know if this is. Um, and so he just acknowledges, like, man, help my unbelief. And then Jesus, he calls out the demon. The demon leaves the boy, and he shows, like, what do you think this teaches us about his compassion? How do you feel when you're doubted? Like, is that just a little bit frustrating? I'm just putting the human emotion on it. I mean, it's just like, yeah, and I feel like in this moment of frustration, where we even kind of read some tone into what he says, like, man, um, there's still, like, great compassion here. Jesus doesn't, like, he doesn't scold them. He doesn't even really, like, he doesn't scold the man for his unbelief, does he? There's no negative reaction toward the man, even when the man recognizes, like, I believe, but forgive me for my unbelief. Jesus doesn't react that way, right? Jesus saw the crowd that came running together. He rebuked the unclean spirit. He drove him out, and kind of the story moves on. Like, Jesus has so much compassion. Even in, I would say, like, Jesus' compassion is greater than our doubt, right? Like, even our doubt, even our lack of faith is not at all equal to Jesus' compassion. And so then we move on into, like, verse 28. They go in the house, and his disciples, they're alone now, and they're kind of in this private moment, and now now we're dealing with maybe their doubt. Now we're dealing with a little bit of their struggle with faith, because now they're going, Jesus, why couldn't we cast that out? Why couldn't we deal with this? And I think the key insight here is the role of prayer. Jesus addresses their private question about their failure, and his response is, "This kind can come out only by prayer." And then I'm guessing, does anybody say prayer and fasting? There are some translations that say that is. There are some manuscripts that add fasting to that. That this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer and fasting. But um, yep. I want to lean into that. So what Brian just kind of brought up was, he said, I almost wonder in this scenario if there isn't a little bit of pride present for the disciples, maybe even behind this question a little bit, like they've done this kind of thing, and and so maybe there was a little bit of pride there, and they're trying to do this maybe by their own power, right? And that makes sense because most of the time, like, isn't that how we learn? Most of the time we learn, like, when I think about a lot of things I learned growing up, like, um, early on at least, and I would say, like, there's two different ways we learn. We learn by watching, right? And we watch something and then we do it the same way. So, like, it was a good memory with my dad that I remember. Like, uh, we were talking one day, last few weeks before he died, and he was talking about just how sad he was when his dad died. And as he was talking about that, he was just like, you and your grandpa were close, and he was like, man, I don't know if any of the grandkids learned more from him than you did. And he just started talking about that. He was like, I realized that just even recently when we were getting in the truck and I saw you tie the rope, and he was like, you tied it, and he was like, man, I looked at that and I was like, that looks like my dad tied that. And there's a fair amount of things I learned growing up, right? That it was just like, watch how it's done and then do what I watched, right? There's a fair amount of that. But then as we get older, like, there's this other form of learning that we do where we start to learn, like, how to think, and we start to learn, like, conceptually how to do, like, broader areas of things, right? So it's more of like, instead of just do step one, step two, step three, like, we sort of learn how to think about something. We start to sort of learn how to, like, diagnose something or process something, and sort of come to a solution. So there's these two, but the disciples, I think, in this moment are just going, man, you sent us out and we've watched you do this, right? They've seen Jesus drive out demons, specifically that exact thing in Mark's gospel. We've seen that. And so I just feel like there might be this moment for the disciples where they've just been here and it's like, we did what we saw you do. We did it exactly the way we said the thing and we did the thing, and why couldn't we make it happen like you could? Right? And I think that's, like, if we really dug into maybe where that pride exists and where there would be a problem, it would maybe be in that little phrase, like you could. And it's almost like they missed it altogether. And Jesus is going, why is Jesus saying, well, this is the kind that comes out by prayer? I put that question, what does this emphasize? Well, it emphasizes who's doing it, right? It emphasizes that, guys, you're not me. You are not God. And so it's almost as if he's kind of highlighting to them, like, you need my power still. In those instances, like, in other words, this is only done by the power of prayer. It's just like, man, if it highlights for us, like, especially, particularly as disciples, as people who want to minister to others, like, if any ministry is ever going to take place in our lives, if I'm ever going to do anything good for God, it's because He did it and I was just obedient, right? It's not ever going to, I don't think there's ever going to be this moment where it's going to be like, man, that was awesome. I did that. But there's just this reality in ministry that the more you do ministry, the more that you, like, are with people, you just start to realize, like, oh man, I it is a daily reminder of how little you can actually do. If you're not connected to the Son, then, and you just start looking about, like we were talking about, the two different kinds of teaching. And it's like, I think Jesus is wanting them to pick up this other kind of teaching. Like, he's wanting them to think about these things and realize, but they're just kind of doing the, well, that's what you did, so that's what I'm going to do. And in the end, I think we start to look back, right? Like, over the two feedings. If we rewind back a few weeks and we look at, man, those two feedings of large, I mean, thousands of people. And in both cases, like, one of the things that Mark does a really good job of highlighting to us is what did the disciples do? They brought the baskets to Jesus and took the food to the people. But they had to come to him with the baskets first, right? And it's just like, it's almost like Jesus is really just trying to get it through to them that it's like, hey, everything that you're ever going to have for them, you're going to get from me. Keep getting it from me. Keep coming to me. And I think that's the whole point of his statement. Well, that kind's only driven out by prayer. And it's just kind of this moment of realization for the disciples that it's just like, guys, there's just things that you're not going to be able to do because only God does that. And so it's sort of this teaching moment for them, and they go on, right? Like, it says they go on from there, verse 30, and they pass through Galilee. He didn't want anyone to know because it says that he's still teaching his disciples. So this is the second moment. This is only the second time in Mark that Jesus goes here with them, right? But he goes there again and he predicts his death. So we're at that second part of Mark. We've seen that turning point. The first half of Mark leading up to this, the first 8 chapters, was really focused on, I would say, if you wanted to summarize those first 8 chapters, right, it was just awe. Everyone has just been amazed by the things that Jesus is doing. We saw that over and over. Jesus did things and people were amazed. And so it was like Jesus coming on the scene. And then we've seen this shift now, and now it's about Jesus being the Messiah. Now I'm gonna suffer. I am the Messiah, but I'm a suffering Messiah, and I am gonna die. And he says, I am gonna be raised in 3 days. And the disciples all, like, got it, right? No. Like, Mark just flat tells us, they don't understand. Jesus said this, and they don't understand what he was saying. They were afraid to ask him. And then Mark's like being more of a storyteller than he's been his entire gospel right here, because he's just, this scene continues, and we find out maybe why they didn't understand, and maybe why it's not sinking in, because it says they come to Capernaum and they're in the house, and he asks them, hey, what and I don't know if you're a parent of, like, especially if you're a parent of more than one kid and they were anywhere close in age, then you know exactly what I'm talking about, when it's just you get to that place where you know what was going on in the back seat. They don't think you know what was going on back there, but you know, because you heard it and you saw it in the mirror, and it's like, man, come on, guys, like, but you're like, what? Hey, what was going on back there? And we kind of get that. Mark's like, they get to where they're going. They get to this house in Capernaum, and Jesus is like, hey, what were you guys talking about? Because you didn't get what I was talking about. So what were you talking about? And it says they kept silent, because it's what I was saying about that parenting thing. Like, you know what that silence is like, right? Like that. We're that really, like, and some kids are really good at the dumb look. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't. I don't. What do you mean? What were we talking about? And why? Because on the way, while Jesus is trying to tell them that he's going to die, uh, they're arguing about who is the greatest. So somehow, right? Like, here's what's so fun about these guys is, like, just seeing this human element, because and I think it's fun because we are so much like this. Like, they just had an epic fail in front of this huge crowd, totally got it wrong. Jesus comes in and cleans up their mess. Now he's walking with them, trying to tell them what he's about to do, and they're arguing about who's the greatest. Like, after they just totally screwed up, they're talking about which one of them is the greatest. And so it says in verse 35, he sat down and he called just the 12, and he said to them, if anyone would be first. And we get this whole concept again. If you remember, I highlighted it a few weeks ago, but like, I think Jesus throughout the gospel, and I think that all four gospel writers do a really good job of giving us this realization that the kingdom is so different from this world, right? Because the kingdom of God is a paradox to this world. And we see one of those paradoxes here, because Jesus says, well, let me just tell you guys something. If anyone would be first, he must be last, and he must be servant of all. And so we get that paradox, that look of, it's just like, man, in the kingdom, first is last, master is servant. Like, I mean, it's so backwards to the way this world works. And it says to illustrate, right? There's a child there, and he puts this child in the midst of them, and he actually says to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. And so we're in this second section. That's now we've shifted from this faith, prayer, spiritual power to humility and radical discipleship. And so there's this contrast, right? There's this contrast between Jesus' focus on suffering and then the disciples in the midst of that talking about who's the greatest. Jesus is trying to talk about one thing, they're talking about a totally different thing. And why do you think, just looking at that question, Why do you think the disciples struggled so much with pride and competition, even after they witnessed Jesus' power? Yeah. It seems like that's just such a huge part of our brokenness, right? Um, we're competitive. Yeah. Yeah. So Abby just highlighted a really like kind of interesting thing about that fallenness too, right? Like we see it in our kids from a very young, like we don't even have to really be taught that, do we? Like there's just something in us that's just to try to compete or to, yeah, like there's that kind of this weird pride struggle in us that just exists. Any other thoughts there? Why on maybe why the disciples struggled so much with this, even when they're seeing Jesus' power. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Do you think and I really want you to think about this question, but do you think we have a very good eternal perspective? Like do you think we process life through that lens very well? Because I don't. In fact, like there's a lot of times that like the reality is like life and my current circumstances distract me a lot. I have a really hard time seeing beyond my pain. I have a really hard time seeing beyond my stress. I have a really hard time seeing beyond what's going on sometimes day to day, or it's where I find value in a week like last week where it's like I have to change my setting, my routine, I have to get away from distractions so that I can do that. So that I can like on purpose go, I'm thinking about a larger chunk of time and I want to be able to focus on that and I want to like we're just not good at that and in this moment like we're seeing it, right? Like if we're following and we're tracking with Mark, the disciples don't get it. And so what kind of king do they think Jesus is? And it speaks to what you were saying about their current circumstance. Jesus is he is going to finally win this battle with Rome. Jesus is here to finally get us out of oppression. Jesus is finally here to be like that. When they thought Messiah, they thought king and they thought earthly king. And so that is wrapped up in this pride because for them, like, there's no like, hey, like they don't know what we know. They don't have this ability we have to zoom out. They don't even get like we can remind ourselves, right? And go, man, sometimes I need to operate with the end in mind. And I know what man, the New Testament is full of rich promise for us that we know who wins the battle. We know where home is. And we just have to be reminded of it, and they don't get it. And so for them, all this stuff's going on, and they're not even thinking like, hey, Jesus isn't going to be with us. They're not even thinking like, no, they left everything. They're not quite 3 years into following him, and they're just going, hey, as soon as he does take his throne, I'm going to be at the right. And they're not thinking heaven, they're thinking Israel. I'm gonna sit by the king. I'm gonna be the greatest. Like, I'm gonna put this together and I'm gonna get this. And
So we shouldn't be so hard on them
probably not.
because from them times to this day, there's still tons of people that are in the same boat.
For sure. For sure. And actually, like you say, we shouldn't be so hard on them. Like, they I kind of like I was just saying, I mean, we have a whole lot more to go off of than they did.
Exactly. We have a lot more information.
Yeah. Um and we still get it wrong. And we still can't keep our mind on things not of this earth like we're encouraged to do. And we still can't think about things that are good and pure and holy and right. And like, we can't do that. Like, we still get distracted by our life day to day. We still get distracted by what's going on around us. And so we get this key insight, this first key insight here, that Jesus says the last of all will be the servant of all. Like, the key insight is true greatness, right? What's true greatness? In light of the kingdom, in light of who Jesus is, in light of all that's going on, Jesus defines greatness, and he says, here's the definition of greatness: the last and the servant. That's greatness. If you want to figure out how to be the greatest, if you want me to answer, it's almost like back to the illustration we were using. It's the parent saw the conversation in the back seat, confronted it. The kids are playing dumb, and so as the parent, you just go, "Well, I actually know what you were talking about, and let me just go ahead and answer your argument for you. Let me just go ahead and tell." And so Jesus goes, "Let me just tell you what greatness is: being last and serving." And then he goes so far as to grab a child and he brings this child over and he says, you need to be humble like this. That's what greatness is in the kingdom. And so I just put a question there for you to kind of reflect on a little bit. But what practical steps can we take to cultivate a lifestyle of humble service? What does that look like? Um, any thoughts in response to that question? How can we cultivate a lifestyle of service, a lifestyle of humility? Putting others first. Tell me what you mean. Okay. Okay. So, yeah. So, I mean, to summarize, like, just setting the table for generations behind us, like, that's really hard to do, though. I'm learning that, like, the hard way right now, I think, because there are times, like, with my own kids, that I'm like, man, why aren't it? And similar to this, it's like, why aren't you getting this? Like, what did we? But then I'm reminded, like, it's almost like this moment of, well, Ryan, did you like it when people set the table for you? Or was there this little bit of you that was like, well, I'm gonna figure this out, and so it's back to that whole idea of like, man, we've kind of got to walk with them, and at some point kind of just help them figure it out, right? Because then if we don't, then we get in that place where we say like, man, I want, like we all have, that's part of our journey, right? Where we say, I want my faith to be my own, not my parents or not my churches or not my, like I want to own my faith. And so somehow we've got to figure out how to humbly walk with our kids to help them own their faith and not have ours. One of the things I put down as I was thinking through that question was just like how important titles are to us. And it's just, man, what's one practical step we could take to cultivate a lifestyle of humble service? Just not being about any titles in our lives. Like, just, man, I'm not, it's just thinking through, like, I'm not here to be the man, you know? And it's literally having that attitude of like, man, I would love to be the guy that if it could be said of me, it was just, man, he was about always trying to help somebody else be the man. Because that's kind of what I hear Jesus saying, like, just it's the last being the first. It's the person who's just going, man, I just want to serve. I want to help you. I want to lift you up. I want to do this for you. So he gives them this lesson on greatness and this lesson on humility, and then he got the second key insight is an insight about radical purity, right? And I don't think that word radical is misused here. I don't think you the fact that I used that word was too much, because what does he say? If your hand causes you to sin, that you do, cut it off. If your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, right? Like I put it under there, the insight there, but and I really want to explore it for just a moment, like this hand, foot, and eye imagery. We see it in verses 43 through 48 there when he's talking about temptation to sin, and it's hand, foot, and eye. I mean, do you think Jesus is really like promoting self-harm here? Do you think he's really saying, hey, I'm promoting you harming yourself in this way. I'm promoting you cutting your hand off, gouging your eye out. Yeah. He's for sure highlighting how severe sin is. What else were you saying though? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So the thing they were saying was, well, because he's not really promoting harm, but he's talking about the severity of sin, and because if you cut your hand off, you can still sin. If you gouge your eye out, you can still sin. So maybe if we lean into his illustration here a little bit more, maybe in taking sin seriously and in his highlighting of how serious sin is, he talks about hell here quite a bit. Maybe instead of literally thinking about our hand and our foot and our eye, maybe we should think about what we do and where we go and what we look at. What do we do with those three things? Yeah. Maybe that's where we should be going with this instead of self-mutilation being the illustration here. Maybe the illustration is, man, I should probably think about what I do every day. Like I probably should really to help guard my heart, to help guard my purity, to practice radical purity against sin. I probably should put a lot of thought into what I'm going to do today, where I'm going to go. And just like I'm thinking about what I'm going to do, maybe I should also there should also be some thought about what I'm not going to do, right? Maybe there should be a lot of thought about, well, I'm not going to do that. I am going to do this. I'm not going to go there, but I am going to go here. I'm not going to say that, but I am going to say this, or I'm not going to look at that because I know what that brings about for me, and I know the slippery slope that that puts me on. And so it leads to that question: what specific sins or temptations do we need to aggressively guard against in our culture? Do any come to mind just right offhand? Sexual temptation, love of money, greed, selfishness, gossip. Man, gossip's a big one. We're I part of preparation for next year. We're going to do a series next summer in Proverbs, and I mean the writer of Proverbs talks about gossip and probably puts it in the best light. It's one of the best illustrations. I mean, he just calls gossip tasty morsels, and like, man, they are pretty tasty. And then he talks about how they once they get in you though, man, they wreak havoc. And it's I have acid reflux, so I know exactly what he's talking about, man. Just a Snickers before bed, and I'm miserable for 4 hours. So yeah, I mean there's a lot, right? And but what's crazy is Jesus highlights, and I brought up where we go. And the interesting thing is like we almost have to think about where we go on a much greater scale, because it used to be where you went literally meant where you get up and go. But now, where do you go? Where do your thumbs take you? Right? And so now it's like, ooh, this is even bigger deal than it was maybe in their culture. Like, what do I need to guard against? And how am I going to guard against that? And then we get this last key insight. It's right at the end, and it's really just like one or two verses, but he he talks about being salty. The key insight is being salty. Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another, he says in verse 50. And this saltiness, what does that refer to? What do you think saltiness is? What does he mean by being salty? Here's what I think. In light of what he's just talked about, what we know what salt adds flavor, right? Salt makes something. What adds more flavor to our culture and looks more different in our culture than someone who lives by radical purity? I mean, is there anything more salty than someone who just goes, no, man, I'm not watching that? No, I appreciate what you're saying right now, but you need to stop because I'm not even going to entertain this gossip right now. I'm removing myself from that. Like, no, I'm not. I like what's more salty than a bunch of people walking around with Gab wireless phones and going, yeah, I can't. Yeah, I just know I probably can't handle AT&T and Verizon right now. I don't need a smartphone. I just need my phone as a means to talk and text every once in a while, but it's about it. Like it's salty, right? And that's kind of where he's going with this. Is he's just like, guys, I'm encouraging you this stuff because you are going to look so different in the world. You are going to season the world with this radical purity, with this influence that encourages others, right? This influence that puts others first and makes less of yourself, and this influence, like it's going to be salty when you show up to the buffet and you let everyone go in front of you, and you're handing out plates instead of filling your own, and you're like all of these different things. It's like it's so different, and it's encouraging, and it's fostering others, and it's making more of these things that the world is making less of. And so when we think about that, if that's where he's going, if saltiness refers to these things and this different living and this fostering of peace, then the question is, how can we build up and encourage other believers to stay salty and promote peace in our community? How can we do that?
Example.
Yeah. I think that's the simple answer. By doing it. Like the best thing I can do, like it's I'm done with lip service. You know, I'm done with the do as I say, not as I do. And it's just, yeah, like I'm gonna be an example of this. I'm gonna promote this by living it. And then, man, like the reality is truly right that if I'm if I'm living by this radical purity that he talks about, and I'm truly living in this humble servant manner, um, I don't I don't think ministering to others is as hard as we make it, is it? When we go, I don't I'd love to minister to my neighbor, but I don't know what to say. And I'm just not smart enough, and I don't know enough of the word, and I'm just if you're just living in this way, you will probably have opportunity, right? Because it's probably going to be like, hey, what are you doing? You know, like it may just be as simple as why are you bringing us cookies? Like once a week? What are we doing? You know, because that stuff, it's different. And so it's really starting to think that way. That like, man, how can I be salt in a bland place? How can I bring that kind of life to it? And um, I think it's a lot. And so I just want, before we pray, I just want to encourage you. Like, I think there's a lot of things that we could do, and there's a lot of things like that we could say we're going to do. And I'm not saying don't do that, and I'm not, but sometimes like if something is really going to start to make a difference, and I'm really going to do something, like it might really be helpful if I just go, man, what is one practical actions? What's just one practical action step I could take from this to be more humble, or to be more of a servant, or to be more pure? Like, what's just one thing I could do? And like, isn't it? I'm just kind of past this. Like, hey, here's a whole bunch of generalities, and now go and do all of it. But it's like, hey, how about I make this achievable? So like, what's one thing I could do, and then I could build on it. I'll pray, and then, yeah. Next week is Thanksgiving. We do not have Wednesday night next week, and then somehow we're gonna cover 6 chapters in 2 weeks. So that's gonna be fun. But I'll pray. God, thank you for your word and for this encouragement from Jesus. And God, as disciples ourselves, I think there's just this reality that we often forget, and we're often distracted, and we're often prideful and selfish. And God, I just pray that you would help us to take steps to be salty, like Jesus is talking about, to think differently, to look different from this world, God, to guard our path, to guard our eyes, to guard our hearts, to watch where we're going and what we're doing and what we're saying and how we're engaging in life with other people. God, just I pray that you would help us to take, even if it's baby steps, just action steps forward that are going to help us look more like we're living for your kingdom than living for ours. We love you. Thank you for Jesus, and we pray these things in his name. Amen.